Have you ever wondered what would happen if a god stepped into our world, not a god of myth or faith, but a living, breathing being of impossible power, forged in the fires of human ambition and endless war? What if the Emperor of mankind, master of the Imperium, Lord of Terra, the immortal father of humanity, suddenly appeared, here, in our universe, in our time? Think about that for a second. No Imperium, no chaos gods clawing at reality, no space marines, just us, fragile, divided, endlessly arguing humanity. And then, out of nowhere, him, the Emperor, the pinnacle of human potential, the psychic sun around which an entire galaxy once revolved. Stay until the end of this video, because by the time we reach the conclusion, you'll understand not just what might happen if the Emperor came here, but why it might already be happening. And trust me, you'll want to hear the ending. It begins not with thunder or divine light, but silence. A rip in reality, subtle, like the air holding its breath. In the vacuum above Earth's orbit, space bends, stretches, and tears. And through it, a figure steps out. A man, or rather, something that only appears to be a man, tall, golden, radiating a warmth that makes the stars themselves flicker, as if even they bow in reverence. The Emperor of mankind has arrived, but this universe is not his. There are no legions here, no golden throne, no high lords, only a planet of billions bickering, bleeding, striving toward greatness and sinking into chaos all at once. He senses it immediately, the psychic silence, no warp, no demons, no roar of the immaterium beneath existence. Just stillness, a strange, quiet purity. For the first time in countless millennia, the Emperor stands in a reality untainted by the warp. He kneels, touches the emptiness of the void, and feels the difference. No psychic echoes, no screams of tortured souls, no whisper of chaos, just the cold truth of physics, and he knows instinctively that he is utterly alone. Moments later, the instruments of Earth begin to panic. Telescopes detect a sudden spike in radiation from a point where no star exists. The ISS crew sees something impossible, a golden figure walking across the void as if gravity itself dares not touch him. Military satellites scramble, governments fall into confusion, and every news network on Earth begins to pulse with one word: contact. And down below, on the blue surface of this quiet planet, billions of humans look to the skies and ask the same question: who is that? The Emperor does not answer. He simply descends slowly, silently, like a divine judgment. He lands in the deserts of what we would call the Middle East, where once, long ago, humanity first learned to build civilization. The symmetry of it is almost poetic. Sand curls around his feet as he takes his first step on modern Earth. And every camera that captures him goes black, every satellite feed scrambled, every mind sensitive enough to feel his presence shattered. Governments convene emergency sessions. Religious leaders call it prophecy. Scientists call it a quantum anomaly. And the people, they call it a miracle. But the Emperor of mankind does not seek worship. He never did. He seeks only understanding, because this Earth, this reality, this fragile little planet should not exist. Not like this, not free of the warp, not free of chaos. He begins to walk. Every step he takes alters the air. Clouds swirl above him. Animals kneel without knowing why. The ground itself hums with faint energy. He reaches a nearby settlement, small, quiet, unremarkable. People gather. They see him, a man dressed in radiant gold, his face half hidden in light. And though he says nothing, they feel it, the weight, the authority, the divinity of his presence. One man dares to speak. Who are you? The Emperor looks at him, eyes burning like twin stars. "I am humanity," he says. And for the first time in human history, every mind that hears those words believes it. The world begins to unravel. Faiths collapse, governments tremble, armies assemble. Everyone wants a piece of the truth, some to serve it, some to destroy it, because deep down, humanity has always feared one thing above all else, the undeniable proof that a God walks among them. And yet, as powerful as he is, the Emperor finds something that unsettles even him. This universe, our universe, has rules. It's finite, bound, contained in a way his reality never was. No warp, no psychic web connecting all souls. Only isolation. And to the Emperor of mankind, who has spent 10,000 years sustained by the psychic light of humanity, that isolation is a kind of death. He senses billions of minds bright, fragile, disconnected. He cannot hear them as he once could. He cannot feel their souls reaching toward him. To him, this world feels blind, and that terrifies him, so he decides to act. If this universe has no warp, then he will make one. He will build again, from nothing, the empire humanity should have had. Not through war this time, not through conquest, but through awakening. He begins to walk the earth, appearing in cities and villages, in temples and laboratories. Everywhere he goes, things change, technology advances, disease recedes, minds awaken to their fullest potential. And soon, humanity begins to whisper another question. What if this is not an alien, not a god, not a man, but the future of us all? But as the world bends toward his will, something begins to push back, because every universe seeks balance. And even in a cosmos without chaos, creation cannot come without consequence. Somewhere, something ancient and vast begins to stir. Something that should not exist here, and the Emperor feels it. A cold presence, alien and wrong, emerging from the dark between galaxies. Something that should not have followed him, but did. And that is where things begin to unravel. If the Emperor of mankind truly entered our universe, free of the warp yet bound by its own laws, the question isn't what he would do to us. It's what our universe would do to him. Would it reject him? Would it reshape him? Or would it finally give him the peace he has sought for millennia? The world changed in days, not years, not centuries, days. When the Emperor of mankind walked among us, reality itself seemed to bend around his presence. The laws of physics whispered in awe. The boundaries of possibility stretched to breaking. His very existence was a paradox, a living contradiction that forced the universe to re-examine its own rules. At first, humanity rejoiced. He healed the sick with a thought. He stopped wars with a word. Nations once divided by centuries of hatred found themselves silent in his shadow. And yet, in that silence, a new unease was born. Because every leader, every soldier, every priest could feel it, their power meant nothing now. The Emperor did not demand loyalty. He did not ask for thrones. He simply was, and that was enough to terrify the world. In Geneva, the United Nations held an emergency summit. Every delegate was there. Presidents, generals, monarchs, scientists all gathered in one hall, their voices trembling as they argued over what this being was. Was he divine? Was he alien? Was he human? No one could agree. The feeds from the Middle East showed him surrounded by thousands of followers, men and women of every creed, language, and nation, walking beside him as if he had known them all their lives. And when the Emperor finally spoke again, his voice reached every living soul on earth, carried not by sound, but by something greater. "You are asleep," he said. "Humanity has forgotten what it is." The words echoed inside the minds of 8 billion people. Some fell to their knees, some screamed, some wept, believing they had been chosen. Others fled into darkness, terrified of what they had heard, because in that single sentence, every human being felt the weight of their insignificance. But there were others who saw opportunity. Behind the facades of diplomacy and faith, secret organizations began to move. Private military contractors, intelligence agencies, hidden think tanks, all scrambling to understand, to contain, to control the impossible. The Emperor ignored them at first. Their weapons were toys, their ambitions childish, but the more they reached for him, the more he felt something beneath this universe stirring. A hum in the void, a whisper at the edge of existence. He knew that hum, he had heard it before, in another life, another universe. The sound of the warp, but here it was faint, incomplete, as though his very presence had woken it. 3 weeks after his arrival, something happened that changed everything. At 03:17 UTC, deep in the Antarctic ice, scientists working at a neutrino observatory detected an impossible energy surge. A rift, thin as a razor, bright as a dying star, opened in the frozen dark. From it poured a light that bent time and sound alike, and for a fraction of a second, the entire planet dreamed. Every human mind saw the same vision, a throne of gold, a galaxy burning, and a figure, radiant and dying, bound to that throne by cables of fire. Then the light was gone. The Emperor appeared at the site hours later. He said nothing. He simply stood before the fading wound in reality and stared into it, as if looking upon the reflection of his own soul. And for the first time since his arrival, he spoke to himself. It followed me. The rift grew stronger with every passing day. It was no longer a tear in the ice, it was a scar on reality. And through it, faint whispers began to emerge. Voices that spoke no language, yet carried emotion that every heart could understand. Hunger, envy, rage. The Emperor knew those voices. He had fought them for millennia. They were the echoes of chaos. But how could chaos exist here? This universe had no warp, no psychic domain, unless, of course, his very existence had created one. Because where the Emperor walks, the warp follows. Nations turned on one another again, this time out of desperation. Some demanded his help. Others demanded he leave, and yet he did neither. He simply remained by the rift, silent, motionless, like a sentinel before a storm. World leaders sent emissaries. Armies encircled the region, terrified of what might emerge. And then, one night, the rift opened. The ice split, the ground trembled, and from that wound came something small, fragile, and yet impossibly ancient, a spark, wrapped in shadow. The Emperor reached out his hand and caught it. The world held its breath. The spark pulsed once, twice. And then it spoke. "You do not belong here, Father." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was young, but filled with infinite weariness. It was his son, or something that remembered being one. The Emperor stood unmoving. The light around him dimmed, and the world, watching from every corner, saw something they had never thought possible. The Emperor of mankind hesitated, because in that single voice he recognized something terrible. If this universe was free of the warp, then what was this being? A fragment, a memory, or the beginning of something new? He realized, too late, that his arrival had seeded the unthinkable. A universe that had never known chaos was now growing its first demon, and it had been born from him. As governments armed themselves for what they did not understand, as scientists broke their minds trying to explain the impossible, the Emperor stood alone before his creation. The being looked up at him, not with hatred, but with pity. "You carried the warp inside you," it whispered. "You brought it with you, and now Your perfection will infect this universe as it did the last. The Emperor's eyes flared like suns. I am humanity's shield, he thundered. I am its light, its salvation. But the being interrupted. No, Father, you are its curse. And in that moment, the sky itself screamed. Every human mind felt it. The surge of something ancient and primal tearing through the fabric of existence. The rift widened, the stars flickered, the void shivered. And as the Emperor turned to face the storm he had unleashed, the question became not whether this universe could survive him, but whether he could survive it. Because the greatest truth of all was finally revealed, you can take the Emperor out of the warp, but you can never take the warp out of the Emperor. What is a God without believers? What is salvation when it brings the very corruption it sought to destroy? As the rift tore open over Antarctica, the Emperor of mankind, golden, radiant, infinite, stood before a reflection of his own failure. The air rippled, the snow turned to ash, and humanity watched, powerless, as reality began to bend. The being that had emerged from the rift was small, almost childlike, its form undefined, shifting between shadow and light. But its eyes were human, terrifyingly human. It spoke not in words, but in the rhythm of the soul itself. And every mind that heard it understood. This was not just a demon. It was born from the Emperor's own essence. A child not of flesh, but of consequence. At that moment, two truths collided. The Emperor, in bringing his power to our reality, had seeded a psychic echo. And our universe, too weak to hold it, began to create. The warp was being born again, and it started with him. He could feel it, the old whispers, faint but growing stronger. The same seductive voices he had silenced eons ago. The same temptations that had claimed his sons, shattered his Imperium, and drowned entire galaxies in madness. Except this time, there were no Primarchs, no warriors, no empire to stand against it, only humanity, innocent, unarmed, and unprepared. He looked upon this new universe, and for the first time in 10,000 years, he felt something close to despair. In the following days, the world began to fracture under the weight of what it had seen. Those who had once worshipped the Emperor now called him the betrayer. Religious leaders denounced him as the false dawn. Scientists declared him an existential threat, and the military, ever practical, prepared for war. Nations united under fear, not faith. Orbital weapons were aimed, nuclear arsenals were armed, and humanity, the same humanity he had come to uplift, now sought to destroy him. The Emperor did not retaliate. He stood at the heart of the storm, silent, contemplative. He watched as fighter jets screamed overhead, as missiles soared through the sky, as explosions painted the heavens with fire. Each weapon dissolved before reaching him, undone by the sheer pressure of his will. He raised no hand, spoke no word. And yet the very laws of cause and effect obeyed him. To the soldiers who watched their weapons vanish into nothing, he looked like judgment itself. And still, he whispered to no one, "Forgive them. They know not what they awaken." Because deep beneath the ice, the rift was no longer a scar. It was a wound. And through that wound came dreams. Men began to hear voices in their sleep. Women woke screaming from visions of a golden age drenched in blood. Children spoke words they could not possibly know, names of gods that did not exist here. And everywhere, the Emperor's light began to fade. Not because he was dying, but because the universe itself was rejecting him. Our reality was too stable, too narrow, to contain the magnitude of his being. And like a body-fighting infection, the cosmos had begun to push him out. But what happens when a god refuses to die? The answer came in fire. As the rift widened, the earth itself began to convulse. The magnetic field trembled. The auroras bled red and gold. and across the sky, a second sun appeared, burning not with fusion, but with will. It was him, his body now radiating the full force of his psychic being, unshackled, unrestrained. To those watching, it was the second coming. To the Emperor, it was war, because from the rift more shadows emerged, each one a mirror of his past sins. The echoes of his fallen sons, the ghosts of the Horus heresy, twisted and incomplete, feeding on his guilt. Each one spoke with a voice he knew too well. "Father," whispered one shadow, its armor fractured and burning, "you sought to save us once, and now you will damn another universe in your mercy." "Silence," the Emperor commanded. His voice shook the heavens. "You are not my sons." "Then what are we?" it asked, smiling through the flame. "Your reflection." The battle that followed was unlike anything our universe had ever seen. No weapons, no armies, no sound, only the collision of will and reality. Each time the Emperor struck, mountains trembled, oceans roared. Each shadow he destroyed was reborn from the rift, stronger, hungrier, because they were not demons of the warp. They were ideas, manifestations of his own contradictions. Every act of creation he performed birthed another corruption. Every truth he spoke bred another lie. Every attempt to heal the universe only deepened its wound. And in that endless cycle, he saw the same fate repeating again: a new Imperium, a new heresy, a new fall. Because wherever humanity exists, so too does its shadow. At last, he fell silent amid the storm. He knelt, one knee pressed to the burning ground, and whispered words not meant for mortal ears. "I am the beginning," he said softly, "but I am not the end." And with those words, he released his will. The light that had once defined him, golden, radiant, perfect, exploded outward, touching every living mind on earth. Billions of humans fell into a single, unified vision, a dream of what they could become, what they should have been. Asterisk for one heartbeat, all of humanity saw through his eyes. They saw the Imperium, the galaxies, the endless wars, the suffering, and they understood in perfect clarity what he had tried to do, to save humanity even from itself. And then the light vanished. When humanity awoke, the rift was gone. The Emperor was gone. Only the frozen wasteland remained, silent and empty, marked by a single figure of gold, half buried in ice, a statue, unmoving, its face serene. But those who had looked upon him in that final moment felt something new within themselves, not psychic power, not divinity, but awareness, a flicker of potential, a whisper in the blood, as if the Emperor had left not his body, but his spark seated across every human soul. And in the quiet that followed, one question remained. Had he saved this universe, or doomed it to begin the cycle anew? And that is the true paradox of the Emperor of mankind. He is humanity's greatest savior and its inevitable catastrophe. Because even in a universe untouched by chaos, the greatest enemy of humanity will always be itself. With that said, what happens to a world after it has seen a god? That question haunted humanity for decades after the Emperor vanished from the ice. Governments rebuilt, religions reformed, but no one forgot the day when a being of pure light walked the earth, only to disappear into silence. For years, scientists searched for traces of him. Energy signatures, gravitational distortions, anything that could prove he was real. But there was nothing, no body, no relics, only the memory of his presence, and the strange awakening that followed. Because something had changed, quietly, subtly, irreversibly. It began with whispers among the scientific community. Children born after the event displayed unusual neural activity, patterns that defied explanation. Dreams shared across continents. A growing number of people began to report phenomena that should have been impossible. Telepathy, precognition, bursts of energy that defied physics. At first, it was dismissed as hysteria, but then came the proof. A child in Brazil stopped a falling train with a thought. A surgeon in Berlin healed a patient with her bare hands. A man in Nairobi could see events seconds before they happened. It was undeniable. Humanity was changing. They called it the golden strain, a mutation that defied genetic logic, passed not by bloodline but by belief. Those who had watched the Emperor, even through a screen, even once, showed subtle traces of it. Their minds were brighter, and that's when the world realized the truth. The Emperor had not left. He had transferred. Not his body, not his power, but his essence. Fragments of his psychic light scattered across billions of souls. And together, they began to remember him. Across the planet, movements began to rise again. Some called themselves the children of light, seeing themselves as the next step in human evolution. Others, the custodians of silence, believed the Emperor's return would mean the death of reality itself, and sought to erase all trace of his influence. And in the middle stood the ordinary people, the billions who simply wanted to live, torn between awe and terror. Because now, even the simplest question, what does it mean to be human, had no answer. Years passed, and the earth itself began to hum. No one could explain it. At night, if you listened closely, you could hear it, the faint vibration under the soil, like the planet itself was breathing. Some scientists claimed it was seismic activity. Others said it was electromagnetic resonance. But the truth was far stranger. The hum was coming from within humanity. Each new generation radiated more of it, syncing with one another, like cells aligning in a greater organism. The human race was beginning to awaken, not as individuals, but as one mind. And then, one day, it happened. Without warning, every human being on Earth fell silent. All at once. In cities and fields, in factories and temples, billions froze mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-thought. For a full 60 seconds, the world stopped. Every clock ticked. Every machine hummed. But humanity itself went still. And in that silence, every person heard the same voice inside their minds, calm and infinite. Children of Terra, do not fear. I am with you still. The voice was unmistakable. It was him. Panic erupted afterward. Some fell to their knees, praying. Others screamed in denial, declaring it mass psychosis. Governments went into lockdown, terrified that this was the beginning of something uncontrollable. But beneath the chaos, a truth began to crystallize. The Emperor was not gone. He had become us. The golden strain was his legacy, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. And now that bridge had opened fully. Months later, something unprecedented occurred. Satellites detected massive bursts of energy emanating from human neural networks. Psychic resonance rippled across the planet, measurable, physical. And then space itself began to ripple in response. In orbit, telescopes caught a sight that made the blood run cold. The stars moved, not visibly, not dramatically, but ever so slightly, like a curtain being drawn. Behind them, something vast stirred, a shape of gold and shadow, neither alive nor dead. It had no form, yet it had meaning. Humanity's collective mind had reached critical mass, and something answered. It was not the warp, it was not chaos, it was new, a psychic domain born not from fear, but from will. For the first time in all existence, the Emperor had created a warp that was pure, free of demons, free of corruption, fueled by unity instead of division. But such purity could not exist in balance. Because for every light, there must be shadow, And as humanity ascended toward this golden consciousness, the universe itself began to protest. Reality trembled, entropy screamed, black holes shifted in their sleep. The Emperor's rebirth through humanity itself was rewriting the very nature of existence. Across the stars, astronomers began to see it. Nebulas glowing gold where no light should reach. Galaxies twisting into spiral patterns that mirrored the Emperor's sigil. The cosmos was responding, and from deep space, something else began to awaken, not demons, not gods, but guardians, echoes of ancient civilizations long extinguished, architects of forgotten realms, beings who had shaped the laws of the universe before time began. They felt the Emperor's influence, and they feared it, because they knew what he was trying to do. He wasn't merely evolving humanity. He was remaking the universe in humanity's image, and so began the final conflict not of war, but of will. The cosmos itself sought to defend its balance, and humanity, guided by the remnants of the Emperor's light, sought to ascend beyond it. Across the psychic horizon, unseen forces gathered, the stars dimmed, the hum deepened, and every human soul felt the same sensation at once, as if someone, somewhere, had taken a deep breath before a final act. The Emperor was returning, not as flesh, not as spirit, but as the collective consciousness of his children. And this time there would be no throne, no Imperium, no galaxy to burn, only one truth. The Emperor was never meant to rule humanity. He was meant to become it. And as his presence merged with the rising chorus of 8 billion souls, the stars themselves seemed to whisper, "Humanity is no longer asleep." The light that followed was beyond description, not bright, not blinding, but perfect. Every human being became a thread in a single, endless tapestry of awareness. There was no fear, no hunger, no hate, only understanding. The Emperor's final vision had come to pass. Not through conquest, not through sacrifice, but through evolution. And for the first time, the universe itself hesitated, as if unsure what could possibly come next. But every creation bears its shadow, and even perfection casts darkness somewhere, because in the silent corners of the new human consciousness, something watched. Something waited, a faint whisper at the edge of infinity, where the Emperor's light could not quite reach. A voice, familiar, mocking, ancient, "You've done it again, Father. You've made a god, and forgotten the devil." And that's where the story truly begins. Because in remaking reality, the Emperor may have undone the one law that binds all existence, that nothing perfect can last. What happens when perfection realizes it isn't alone? The new humanity, golden, luminous, unified, believed it had transcended everything: pain, fear, death. Even time itself seemed to bend to its collective will. The Emperor's essence flowed through every soul, guiding thought and purpose like the steady pulse of a divine heartbeat. For the first time since the dawn of creation, there was peace. Not the fragile kind born of treaties or fear, but a profound, absolute stillness. Every mind connected, every heart synchronized, no more nations, no more war, no more lies. It was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful, and then something spoke back. At first, it was faint, a ripple across the golden sea of consciousness. A thought that didn't belong, a voice that whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You've built a heaven, Father, but you forgot what must live beneath it." The Emperor, if he could still be called that, felt it immediately, a dissonance in the harmony, a crack in perfection, a reflection of everything he had sought to purge: pride, hunger, the thrill of power. He had thought those instincts gone, burned out of humanity by his light. But they hadn't vanished, they had merely adapted, and now they had found form, From within the collective dream, something began to grow. It started as a thought, small, sharp, and cruel. Then it became many thoughts, then a will, and then a being. No demon, no warp-born creature, this was something new, a shadow born not of chaos, but of order. A dark mirror to the Emperor's creation, woven from everything humanity had repressed in its pursuit of perfection. It had no name, only purpose, to question, to challenge, to unmake. And in its first breath of consciousness, it laughed. Across the luminous tapestry of human unity, fractures began to spread. Subtle, invisible at first, a flicker of doubt here, a question there. Why must we all be one? What is freedom without choice? What is divinity without imperfection? And like seeds in fertile soil, those questions took root. The Emperor felt them, each one like a dagger against his will. He had wanted humanity to ascend beyond its flaws. But in doing so, he had stripped away the very thing that made them human, their capacity to wonder, to rebel, to want. And so, as the light spread across the cosmos, a shadow rose with it, equal, opposite, inevitable. The first rupture came in the Orion sector, a star collapse, not by natural decay, but by choice. It folded in on itself, defying its own physics, and in its place appeared something alive. A sphere of black light, pulsing with the echo of human thought. It whispered into the void, and every nearby mind recoiled from it in horror. "I am the question," it said, "you are the answer, let us see which survives." And with that, the universe changed again. For the first time since his rebirth, the Emperor knew fear, not for himself, but for what he had created. This shadow, this question, was not an external threat. It was a reflection of his own arrogance, his own perfectionism made manifest. It was humanity's subconscious rebellion against eternity. And unlike chaos, it could not be banished to another dimension. Because it was humanity, born from the same light that now filled every soul, the Emperor tried to suppress it, to mend the fractures with will alone. But each act of control only made the resistance stronger. Every effort to silence the shadow gave it more reason to speak. He had remade humanity in his image, and now humanity was learning to defy gods. Centuries passed in moments. The collective mind of humanity fractured into two tides, one of unity, one of divergence. The golden mind, led by the Emperor's will, sought to maintain harmony. The shadow consciousness, led by the question, sought to rediscover individuality. Neither side was evil. Neither side was wrong. They were both expressions of what humanity had always been, the dream of unity and the hunger for freedom. Their conflict was not fought with weapons or armies. It was fought in the medium of thought itself. Every idea, every memory, every dream became a battlefield, and the cosmos shuddered under the weight of their war. Stars flickered and died as both forces bent space-time to their cause. Worlds were remade and unmade in the span of seconds. Even light itself began to rebel, refusing to obey the universal constant. And amid this impossible storm, the Emperor found himself standing once more in the void, alone. He looked upon his creation, radiant and ruined, and finally understood. Perfection was not peace. Perfection was stagnation. And stagnation was death. Humanity could not ascend by shedding its flaws. It could only ascend by embracing them. For the first time, he did not fight the darkness. He welcomed it. And as he did, the cosmos held its breath. The light and the shadow intertwined. The Emperor and the question merged into a single awareness, a perfect equilibrium of chaos and order. And what emerged was not a god, not a being, but a state of being. The universe became conscious. Every atom, every photon, every strand of energy, all of it alive, all of it aware. The Emperor's long journey had ended not in dominance, but in completion. He had become the thing every philosopher and priest had guessed at in fragments. He had become the very mind of reality itself. And in that infinite moment, he whispered a final truth into the void. There was never a difference between God and man, only time. The cosmos shifted. The stars aligned, and for the first time in all eternity, the universe smiled. Humanity was no longer a species. It was the pulse of existence. Every thought, every dream, every memory, woven into the rhythm of creation itself. There were no heavens left to reach, no gods left to fear, no wars left to fight, only understanding, only balance, only the Emperor everywhere in everything. And yet, in the faint, infinite distance of this new consciousness, a flicker remained. Small, defiant, a single human thought echoing out of the silence. What comes after forever? And with that question, the next universe was born. Because even gods must dream, and every dream demands a new beginning. So, here's the thing forever didn't last. Yeah, wild, right. The Emperor, now basically the living consciousness of the whole universe, had finally reached his end game. Peace, balance, no demons, no wars, no chaos, no pain, just eternal stillness. But here's the kicker. Even perfection gets boring. It started like an itch in infinity's skin, a whisper of curiosity that shouldn't have been there. You know that moment when you finish a massive puzzle, and instead of satisfaction, you just stare at it and wonder what you're supposed to do next. That was the universe, and that whisper, that was humanity again. See, the Emperor didn't erase humanity, he became it. But somewhere deep inside that perfect cosmic unity, one spark, one tiny remnant of the old human spirit, woke up and said, "Okay, so what now?" And boom, just like that, the stillness cracked. At first it was subtle, a fluctuation in time here, a ripple in gravity there, but the crack grew. And through that tiny imperfection slipped something new, imagination. Creation didn't stop. It restarted. The Emperor, or rather the universe that was him, started to dream again, and those dreams, they had color. New worlds, new life, new rules, all spilling out from the mind of eternity. But here's where it gets real freaky. Every new world wasn't born from physics or matter. It was born from memory. Bits and pieces of what once was began to take form again. Echoes of Terra, fragments of the old Imperium, and yes, whispers of the warp. The cycle had come full circle. It was like déjà vu on a cosmic scale. A trillion galaxies, each replaying different versions of history. Some where humanity never fell, others where chaos reigned unchecked, and somewhere in between, universes where the Emperor never existed at all, but still influenced everything. Reality had become a playground of possibility, looping endlessly, driven by one unstoppable instinct, curiosity. The Emperor's dream was now the multiverse's heartbeat. And yeah, you guessed it, something else noticed. From beyond the boundaries of even this new creation, something watched. Something that had been there since the first breath of existence and would outlast even gods. It had no name, no form, just presence. It leaned into the void and whispered softly, almost amused, "You never learn, do you?" The Emperor, now woven into everything, heard it. And he answered with a smile that echoed across 1,000 realities. Learning is what makes us human. And just like that, everything shifted again. The boundaries between dream and reality blurred. Universes folded into each other like waves on a cosmic shore. And somewhere, a young civilization looked up at its night sky and saw, for the first time, a faint golden glow among the stars. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know what it meant, but they felt it warm, guiding, familiar. A presence whispering through the void, "I am humanity." And maybe that's the whole point, huh? Maybe the Emperor's journey wasn't about ruling the stars or defeating chaos. Maybe it was about understanding that creation never ends. It just changes hands. Each age gives birth to the next. Each dream gives way to another. And in every version of reality, no matter how far, no matter how strange, humanity finds a way to rise again. Not as servants, not as soldiers, but as dreamers. So yeah, maybe the Emperor of mankind really did come into our universe. Maybe he walked among us, maybe he became us, or maybe he's still dreaming, waiting for us to wake up and continue what he started. Either way, one thing's for sure, the story of humanity doesn't end with a god. It begins with one. And if you listen closely on a quiet night between the hum of the stars, the pulse of your own heartbeat, and the whisper of your thoughts, you might just hear him too. Rise, my children, the dream isn't over yet. What if I told you he's already here, not in a throne of gold, not surrounded by the legions of humanity, not in the halls of the imperial palace, but somewhere far quieter, somewhere you'd never think to look, because here's the truth no one wants to face. If the Emperor of mankind ever came into our universe, he wouldn't come as a conqueror. He'd come as a seed. Think about it. In his own universe, the Emperor was the pinnacle of humanity, an immortal psychic born from the combined sacrifice of 10,000 ancient shamans, a being of impossible power and will. But in our reality, that kind of existence would be alien, unstable. He couldn't just rip open a portal and stride into our world like some demigod from myth. The laws of this universe wouldn't allow it. Our physics would tear him apart. So instead, he'd do what he's always done, adapt. Maybe he'd start small. A fragment of consciousness drifting through quantum fields, searching for resonance. A pulse of thought, carried in radiation, embedded in the hum of existence. He wouldn't arrive as light or flesh, but as inspiration. Every great leap humanity has made, every act of genius, compassion, defiance, or creation, what if that was him? Not guiding from a throne, but whispering through the spark that makes us human. What if that's what he meant to be all along? Not a god to be worshipped, not a tyrant to be feared, but a question to be answered. Every time a scientist asks why, every time an artist wonders what if, every time a child looks up at the stars and feels that ancient pull to explore, that's him. That's the Emperor, reborn in the only form our reality could hold, our collective will, to evolve. But there's something else. Something darker, because if the Emperor truly crossed over, then so did the warp. It wouldn't look like demons and psychic storms here. No, our universe translates such forces differently, more subtle, more insidious, doubt, madness. The gnawing hunger for power, the endless division, the shadows that haunt human history, those could be the echoes of the same chaos, reshaped to fit this world's rules. And if that's true, if he's here, and they are too, then maybe the long war never ended. Maybe it just changed battlefields. Look at the state of our world. Billions striving, suffering, reaching for something higher, but tearing each other apart in the process. Technology advancing faster than wisdom, faith colliding with science, hope rising and falling in endless cycles. It's all so familiar, isn't it? Like a reflection of the 41st millennia. Stripped of armor and bolters, but burning with the same spirit. Maybe our universe isn't separate at all. Maybe it's the next phase, a crucible, a proving ground, a chance for humanity to get it right this time. And if that's true, if he's watching, waiting, testing us, then maybe the Emperor's greatest experiment isn't humanity as we knew it, but humanity as we could become. No gods. No Imperium, just the raw, unfiltered drive to survive, to create, to ascend without a master. Maybe he's not waiting for another great crusade. Maybe he's waiting for a great awakening. Because if the Emperor of mankind truly came into our universe, he wouldn't need to announce himself. He wouldn't demand worship. He'd simply light the fire and let us decide whether to burn or to rise. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear it. That faint whisper beneath the noise of the world. That voice that says, "You are my Imperium now." So maybe the Emperor didn't fall on the golden throne after all. Maybe he crossed the veil. Maybe he's here. Inside the dreamers, the builders, the defiant few who refuse to kneel to despair. Maybe the 41st millennium isn't prophecy or fiction. Maybe it's memory, a warning written in myth. And maybe, just maybe, the Emperor is waiting for us to remember who we were meant to become. What if the Emperor isn't watching from above, but from within? What if every act of courage, every spark of creation, every time a human chooses compassion over cruelty, he feels it? Not as a god judging from afar, but as a participant, living through us, rediscovering what it means to be human again. Because remember this, the Emperor never wanted worship. He wanted understanding. He wanted humanity to become what he could not, something greater than himself. And maybe, in our universe, stripped of divinity, stripped of empire, stripped of the endless war, he's finally getting his wish. Think about it. In his universe, he was burdened by the Imperium, by bureaucracy, faith, corruption, and the tragic failure of his own vision. Here, there's no such empire, no throne, no legions of fanatics twisting his name. Here, he's free. Free to learn, free to evolve, free to feel, and maybe that's the real reason he came. Not to rule, but to remember. Because even perfection forgets what it means to be alive. In the grim darkness of the far future, everything was locked in eternal war. Every emotion was weaponized, every belief corrupted, every dream chained to ideology. But here, there's chaos too. But it's human chaos. We laugh, we cry, we fail and rise again. We love, we destroy, we rebuild. It's messy, it's painful, it's beautiful. And maybe that's exactly what the Emperor needed to see again, the chaos that doesn't destroy, but creates. Maybe he walks among us now, not as a shining god or immortal ruler, but as a teacher, a scientist, a soldier, a parent, a stranger you pass in the street, whose eyes seem to hold 1,000 lifetimes of understanding. Someone who looks at humanity's flaws and doesn't despair but smiles, because he knows that imperfection is what gives us meaning. He tried to make gods of men. Now he learns what it means to be a man among gods in waiting. And perhaps, in those quiet moments when you stare at the stars and feel that strange pull, when you get chills thinking about destiny, when you feel that ancient, electric knowing that you are meant for something greater, that's not imagination, that's not coincidence, that's memory. Somewhere in the deep architecture of our souls, the Emperor's spark lingers, and it's calling us home. But if he's here, even in fragments, then the question remains, what does he want now? Because the Emperor's will has never been passive. He acts, he shapes, he creates order from the storm. So what's his mission in this world? What could drive a being who once commanded galaxies to return to a fragile, divided species like ours? Maybe it's redemption. He couldn't save his Imperium. He couldn't save his sons. He couldn't even save himself. But maybe, in our world, he has a second chance. A chance to guide a new humanity that isn't broken by superstition, or chained to war, or consumed by fear. A humanity that might achieve what even he could not. Not through conquest, not through blind unity, but through understanding. And maybe that's the message we've been missing all along. Every legend, every story, every myth about saviors and golden kings and messiahs returning to heal the world, what if they're not prophecy? What if they're memories of him, echoing across dimensions, manifesting in every culture, every faith, every age? Because deep down, humanity has always remembered the Emperor. We just gave him different names: Prometheus, Osiris, Apollo, Christ, every fire, bringer, every teacher, every light, bearer, all of them, reflections of that same impossible will. So maybe, when he came into our universe, he didn't bring his Imperium with him. He brought his lesson. That divinity without empathy is hollow. That power without compassion is ruin. And that even gods must bleed to understand the beauty of being mortal. And somewhere, perhaps right now, someone is writing these words, feeling that strange pulse in their chest, that echo that says, this story isn't fiction. And in that quiet moment, the Emperor smiles because he's still teaching, still guiding, still dreaming. Think far watching and subscribe to my channel.